part of this is going to come down to a bit of like a personal what can you handle type of a situation, because some people, for any sin, I think there's like people who have a greater resistance maybe, or there's like certain things that just don't phase them as much. But I think just in general, you need to be very careful what you consume, and that's a general statement. But in particular for like romance books, just be watching out. But also movies, because like it's I think the thing about movies in particular is that they're dangerous because it's so in the background. It's like, oh, you see these two people and then they just go behind the door, like you know what's going on there, and it's reached the point where like you just don't even think about that anymore. And that I think is what is more dangerous than like you see like two people like, you know, actually committing the act, which I don't like. That doesn't really happen that's not usually presented on screen in front of you. It's a lot more subtle, and that's what I think makes it a bit more dangerous. Kind of like with the horror thing, where, you know, if like when exactly something becomes a little like iffy is can be hard to tell. But it's like, you know, if you're like actually like doing stuff with demons and it's like, oh, okay, what's going on here? It's kind of the same thing where it can be a bit subtle, and that's what you need to be careful for. Especially if you like, you know, if you have people who are like, if you're like, you know, somebody who is married and has kids and stuff like that, that's where it gets even more so. But just like in your personal life, you have to really consider, you know, what am I consuming and what does it do to me? Like, how does it change how I view things? I think that's the most important thing you have to really remember. And again, I'm guilty of this as well. Everyone is. But like, if I like, for example, watch a lot of like gory stuff over and over and over again, and you become desensitized, that's like just an example of that. So if you watch like a romance thing and that starts to change how you view sex or view like, you know, relationships and dating and marriage, that's what's the dangerous part, is because it's so subtle that it can influence you more than you would realize.
Mm-hmm. With the subtle stuff, there are actually some TV shows that I stopped watching because so much of the plot line revolves around sex, even though they don't show it ever. I'm thinking of like stuff like Friends and New Girl. Those are two that I'm like, they're funny. The funny parts are funny, but so much of the plot line, if you think about it, completely revolves around who's having sex with who. And it just becomes like, it's that background thing where it's like, oh, well, they're not showing it, so it's not that bad. But I'm like, but they're talking about it. And like, all of their actions are driven by this worldview. And you just don't realize those things until you're like, oh my gosh, this is actually the entire plot line. And then there's stuff like The Office. I'm like actually just stating them out, right? But The Office, and I really love Parks and Rec. They have some pretty not okay jokes in there. Crass, very crass humor. But it's not so much the plot line. So those are areas where I'm like, well, okay, I'm watching a secular show. They're going to have those jokes in there because that's what people think is funny. And I can't let this start to affect the way that I think, the way that I speak. And if it does, then I'm like, okay, now I need to reassess. Where is it affecting me? Because obviously you can't avoid absolutely everything. If you're going to be watching secular content, not just watching pure flicks, you're going to run into stuff that's like, okay, this is clearly from a worldview that says that having sex with whoever you want is okay as long as it's consensual. And that's, there is no avoiding that. But then, like I said, like the fact that our standard of a minimum right now is, oh, well, they just kissed and then hinted at it. Like, that's still a lot. And yeah, it's a weird balance of, I don't like the word balance, but I don't want to go too far into, oh, well, I don't care at all. And I also don't want to go too far into, well, I just won't watch anything ever. Because there's good entertainment that shows the concept of romance well. And there's a part of us that really, really strongly longs to see those couples get married. I don't know if that's just personal in my worldview, but I feel like there's a part of us in all of us that we want to see them paired off and we want to see them happy. Because we know that is where there is going to be happiness. We enjoy the weird like tension of who's going to date who, but ultimately we want to see them come together, have a family. Unless you're way far off into culture and secular ideology, I think in general, a lot of us still want to see that happily ever after.
I mean, I think of Pixar movies. And we watched The Incredibles recently. Yeah. Up is an amazing love story. Those are monogamous relationships that still have love as the driving force and do it well and do it the way God intended, with a family, with husband and wife and all that.